Bonjour à tous. Bienvenue. Hello. This press conference virtually is in the Sir John A. Macdonald building in Ottawa. It's Monday, January 31st. I'm Greg Quinn with Market News International. With us today are Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance Chrystia Freeland, Terry Beach, Parliamentary Secretary to the Deputy Prime Minister, Rachel Bendayan, Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Tourism and Associate Minister of Finance, Randy Boissonnault, Minister of Tourism and Associate Minister of Finance. Alors, avec nous aujourd'hui, la vice-première ministre Chrystia Freeland, Terry Beach, secrétaire parlementaire de la vice-première ministre, Randy Boissonnault, ministre du Tourisme et ministre associé des Finances, et Rachel Bendayan, secrétaire parlementaire du ministre du Tourisme et ministre associé des Finances. Before we start, I remind everyone to stick to best practices for sound quality and to minimize outside noise. Secondly, please identify yourself and your media outlet when asking a question and follow-up. Dans une question, une supplémentaire. Last point, we're told we have about 20 minutes for questions. Please bear in mind the time. Dans 20 minutes pour des questions des journalistes. That said, let's begin with some opening statements and then questions, please. Madame Freeland, à vous la parole. Please begin.
OK, merci beaucoup. Bonjour tout le monde. Ça me fait plaisir d'être avec vous aujourd'hui. Près de 2 ans, les Canadiens doivent composer avec la COVID-19. Et il y a presque 2 ans, la pandémie a déclenché la plus forte contraction économique jamais enregistrée au Canada depuis la Grande Dépression. Au pire de la crise, 3 millions de Canadiens et Canadiennes ont perdu leur emploi et notre PIB a diminué de 17%. Aujourd'hui, malgré la présence du variant Omicron, nous sommes en bonne position. Plus de 88% des Canadiens et Canadiennes admissibles âgés de 5 ans ou plus ont reçu une dose de vaccin. Plus de 81% des Canadiens et Canadiennes admissibles âgés de 5 ans et plus sont entièrement vaccinés de doses. Pour les Canadiens, sauver des vies a été la priorité. Cela nous a permis d'avoir le 2e taux de mortalité le plus bas au G7. And our economy has benefited from our approach because from the outset of this pandemic, the most important economic policy has been a strong public health policy. We see the results of that approach today. We have already recovered lost jobs, more than recovered the jobs lost to the COVID recession, a healing which took 8 months longer after the much milder 2008 recession. In fact, as of December, the most recently available data, Canada has recovered 108% of the jobs lost at the peak of the pandemic, significantly outpacing the US, where just 84% of lost jobs have been recovered so far. Canada's GDP has already returned to near pre-pandemic levels. Our GDP growth of 5.4% in the third quarter of 2021 outpaced the US, the UK, Japan, and Australia. In its January World Economic Outlook update, the IMF forecast that Canada will have the second fastest GDP growth in the G7 this year, and that we will have the fastest GDP growth in the G7 next year. So our focus on jobs and growth is working. Business bankruptcies are lower, and about 2,000 more businesses are active in Canada today than before the pandemic. Keeping the Canadian economy on life support as we went into the COVID-19 hibernation was expensive, but we knew that keeping Canadian families and businesses solvent and preventing economic scarring would help our economy rebound. Our government remains committed to the fiscal anchors that we outlined in last spring's budget. We're committed to reducing the federal debt to GDP ratio and to unwinding the COVID-19 related deficits. In October, we pivoted from necessary but costly broad-based support programs to more targeted, less expensive measures. Our government will continue to be a responsible and careful fiscal manager. Despite impressive economic resilience in many parts of the economy, we are mindful of elevated inflation and its impact on the cost of living for Canadians. We know that inflation is a global phenomenon driven by the unprecedented challenge of reopening the world's economy after COVID lockdowns. As we look to the years ahead, our focus must be on jobs and economic growth, priorities that will form the foundation of the budget. And it is on that note that I am here today to announce the launch of pre-budget consultations, beginning today and continuing on to February 25th. I encourage all Canadians to take the time to share your priorities with us by visiting letstalkbudget2022.ca. Et c'est précisément sur cette note que je tiens à annoncer le lancement des consultations prébudgétaires qui débutent aujourd'hui et se termineront le 25 février. J'encourage tous les Canadiens et Canadiennes à prendre le temps de nous faire part de leurs priorités en visitant le Parlant Budget 2022 CA. Au cours des prochaines semaines, je me rejoindrai au ministre du Tourisme et ministre associé des Finances, M. Randy Boissonnault, et aux secrétaires parlementaires Rachel Bendayan et Terry Beach, qui sont avec nous aujourd'hui pour des tables rondes et des conversations avec les Canadiens et Canadiennes de partout au pays. Ces conversations aborderont les défis concrets auxquels les Canadiens et Canadiennes sont confrontés et leurs idées. Cela permettra à notre gouvernement de faire les meilleurs investissements possibles pour favoriser l'emploi et la croissance. Nous voulons connaître les priorités des Canadiens alors que nous poursuivons nos efforts pour rendre la vie plus abordable et bâtir une économie encore plus forte pour la suite. And I'd now like to turn it over to my friend and partner, Randy Boissonnault, the Minister of Tourism and Associate Finance Minister. Randy, à vous la parole.
Thank you very much, Deputy Prime Minister. First, I would like to begin by acknowledging that I'm on Treaty 6 territories, joining you from Edmonton. And Treaty 6 is a traditional gathering place for many diverse Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Métis, the Blackfoot, Nakota, the Saulteaux, and many other whose histories, language, and cultures continue to influence our community, including Inuit peoples. And as you noted, Deputy Prime Minister, Omicron has reminded us that we are still living in a pandemic. And for almost 2 years now, our government has strived to be flexible and to adapt to the changing nature of the pandemic. Toutefois, notre gouvernement reconnaît que certaines entreprises sont encore profondément touchées par la pandémie, et ce même avant la poussée d'Omicron. Et je pense notamment au secteur de l'industrie touristique canadien. And that's why we introduced the Tourism and Hospitality Recovery Program and the Hardest Hit Business Recovery Program, which provide wage and rent subsidy support of up to 75% and 50% respectively to support businesses as they help reduce the spread of Omicron. Now, we know that the Canadian economy will not fully recover until the tourism sector recovers. Nous savons également que nous traverserons cette crise pour connaître des jours meilleurs et des lendemains plus prospères, ce qui m'amène à l'annonce d'aujourd'hui. And through these pre-budget consultations that the Deputy Prime Minister has just announced, we want to hear from all Canadians in every corner, on every coast, who are the engine behind what makes our economy so strong. So what are your priorities, your ideas for the future, and what issues matter most to you? We've come a long way since the depths of the COVID recession, but I know, and the whole team at Finance knows that there's so much more work left to be done. Nous voulons entendre les Canadiens sur la façon dont nous pouvons poursuivre la reprise économique du Canada en investissant maintenant afin de soutenir les familles et les entreprises canadiennes, et ce, pour toutes les générations à venir. Over the coming weeks, together with Deputy Prime Minister Freeland, other ministers, with parliamentary secretaries, Bendayan and Beach, and we will be meeting with industry leaders, key stakeholders, Canadians, to hear your ideas on how our government can help to grow and prosper in a resilient post-pandemic economy. We're listening to what Canadians from a range of backgrounds and experiences need and how our government can maximize the impact of every dollar we invest in our economy and ultimately that we invest in Canadians. Housing affordability remains a real concern across the country, especially for young Canadian families hoping to buy their first home. And this is a priority for us. And we want to hear from you on how we can take further action in the upcoming budget on this important issue. J'ai hâte d'entendre les Canadiens et Canadiennes me faire part de leurs priorités et leur vision de l'avenir. This is your budget, so let's talk and work together. Thank you very much. Deputy Prime Minister, back to you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Randy. And I think it is over to the journalists, and we're ready to answer your questions.
Yes, thank you, ministers. Operator, can we have the first question, please? Première question, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you. Merci. Please press star 1 at this time if you have a question. S'il vous plaît, appuyez sur étoile 1 maintenant pour poser une question. The first question is from, la première question est de Wyatt Sharp, The Wyatt Sharp Show. Please go ahead, à vous la parole.
Hi there, thank you, and good to talk to you once again. As a first question, probably to Minister Freeland, obviously kind of the elephant in the room right now is the truck driver protest happening in Ottawa. So first of all, can you speak about the ongoing situation in Ottawa? But obviously, you know, your portfolio has obviously a lot to do with the current economic standpoint. And so it seems as if, you know, the protesters in Ottawa are protesting the, you know, vaccine mandates for truck drivers. And it seems as if the main concerns coming from these protesters seems to be that, you know, the vaccine mandate for truck drivers could cause some disruptions to the supply chain because there could be less protesters on the road. Do you share some of these concerns, Minister?
Okay, well, thank you for the question. And look, I am speaking to you from Ottawa today, and I was in the House of Commons today. It was important for me to be there in person. But I live in Toronto, and I was home in Toronto over the weekend, and I was reading the newspapers with my kids, and we saw that terrible picture of the Terry Fox statue desecrated. And I have to tell you, my kids were just shocked. Like all, you know, Canadian young people, they've grown up with Terry Fox as a hero and the Terry Fox runs. And they couldn't believe that someone would do that. And I am sure that I am one of just many, many, many parents across the country whose kids looked at that picture in the newspaper and were horrified. And so, you know, my first reaction is just to say things have been happening in Ottawa over the weekend, which are just unacceptable. Desecration of national monuments and national symbols, people brandishing totally horrifying symbols of hatred and intolerance, including the swastika. That is completely unacceptable. And it's really important for all Canadian leaders across the country to be very, very clear and to speak out and say, this is unacceptable. This is not the Canada who we want to be. And I really profoundly believe, and I know that this is not what Canada is. So let me just start by saying that really clearly and urging political leaders across the country, community leaders, let's all stand up. Let's be clear to each other. Let's be clear to our kids. This is not right. This is not okay. Now, you asked about vaccine mandates. And let me say, as Minister of Finance, I know that the most important economic policy is a strong public health policy. The tool we all know is most effective at fighting COVID, at fighting the spread of COVID, at keeping people out of hospitals and out of ICUs is vaccination. The way to continue our economic recovery is for all of us who are eligible to get vaccinated. If you haven't been vaccinated yet, please go and get vaccinated. If you haven't had your third dose yet, please get it. And we should all be ensuring that our kids get vaccinated. It's the right thing to do personally. It protects each one of us who gets a vaccine. It's also the way to protect our family and friends. And you know what? That is the single most important economic policy we have now, is for everyone who is eligible to get a vaccine. And the reality is, vaccine mandates have been working. We have seen that empirically in Canada and around the world. Introducing vaccine mandates has helped raise the level of vaccination. So that makes it a good economic policy too.
Okay, thank you. And then I guess just to follow up with you on that, obviously, I'm a young person, and I also too saw the terrible situations with those types of things in Ottawa over the weekend. But how can you differentiate those types of people from, the types of people who maybe didn't show up at the protest over the weekend, but, may have, some concerns over the vaccine for, let's say, seeing something over social media and for not necessarily knowing better than to, believe in that? How can you further convince people that vaccination is the right thing to do?
Well, I guess partly by having the conversation that we're having right now. I think it has been important and valuable for political leaders to show themselves getting vaccinated. Each time I've had one of my doses, I've posted a picture of that needle in my arm on social media, because I want people to know that I know it's safe and I have had a vaccine myself. And not only is it safe, I was so grateful each time I was vaccinated, because I knew that was protecting me and my family and my friends. And I do want to say, as a mother of 3, all of my children have received all of the doses they're eligible for. And my kids were so happy and so relieved to be able to get vaccinated too, because that makes it possible for them to go to school. It makes them feel safer with their friends. So I guess, what we need to do is just tell the truth. Tell the truth about vaccines, explain to people that they are the right thing to do for our community, our friends, and our family. But you know what? They're the right thing to do for each one of us. We've seen the really horrific consequences that getting COVID can have. How terrible it would be to end up in an ICU, how terrible it would be to be intubated. This is a very, very serious illness. And we know that getting vaccinated hugely reduces your chances of getting COVID. Crucially, it really, really reduces your chances, if you do end up getting COVID, even as a vaccinated person, of being really, really sick as a result. So I think we just have to keep on talking to people. And I'm glad that you're doing that on your show.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you. Let's try the next question. Prochaine question, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you. Merci. The next question is from la prochaine question est de Jordan Press, the Canadian Press. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Good afternoon. Minister, I'm wondering if the government agrees with the Bank of Canada's assessment from last week that slack in the labor market and in the economy overall, has been absorbed.
Thank you very much for the question, Jordan. I am a very big believer in the independence of the Bank of Canada. We had some important conversations with the Bank of Canada in the fall, which led to a 5-year renewal of the Bank of Canada's mandate. including renewing the primacy of the 2% inflation target. I think that is really, really important as we go into a year in which the Canadian economy is entering 2022 on a strong footing. We have some powerful tailwinds pushing us into the year from the end of 2021. But we know that the global economic outlook is complex. So having that clear Bank of Canada mandate, I think, is a very, very important measure going into this year. Beyond that, I am not going to comment on any statements by the Bank of Canada or on any decisions of the Bank of Canada.
Then, as my follow-up, I mean, I'm trying to understand how the government sees the economy right now. And so in that context, how then do you start planning for a budget when there is a possibility that if you add too much stimulus, you could add to inflation rates, which you have pointed out are something that need to be brought down. So I'm wondering how, given the economic conditions that you just laid out, you foresee this budget then being laid out so you can address the key issues in the Canadian economy and not add to inflation rates?
Yeah, no, that is a really good question, Jordan. And I would say, in terms of the macroeconomic environment and how those macro considerations will shape the budget, let me offer just a few considerations. First, inflation is elevated, and that is certainly something that we need to be thinking about. I would point out that elevated inflation is a global phenomenon. And inflation, actually, the latest inflation numbers from the US, from Germany, from the UK are all higher than in Canada. Canada's inflation right now is lower than the OECD average, than the G7 average, and the G20 average. And I'm sort of belaboring that point because there are many drivers of elevated inflation right now, which are global in nature, which are about the strains in the global economy as we do two unprecedented things. The first was locking down after COVID. The second has been reopening after a COVID lockdown. And that is leading to some pressures that the world economy has never had to grapple with before. It is leading to the supply chain pressures we are seeing. It is leading to the kind of unusual mix of demand for services and demand for durable goods that we have been seeing. And we've also had some commodity price issues, the price of energy, price of agricultural commodities. All of these have been contributing to a global phenomenon of elevated inflation. So that is there. I emphasize, very much a global phenomenon, something to consider. Affordability for Canadian families, also something that we are definitely very much bearing in mind. Randy, a minute ago, spoke about housing affordability as a key consideration, and it definitely is. And I'll just say two more things in terms of high-level considerations. I do really think that we need to place a priority on economic growth, on green growth and the green transition, on working hard at ways to increase Canada's economic potential. Janet Yellen, in a Davos speech about 10 days ago, spoke about a modern supply side economics approach, about increasing the economy's potential through things like early learning and childcare, through things like support for workers to help them participate in the labor force, Canada Workers Benefit. So a lot of measures like that to drive growth. And I do think we need to think about as well areas where we can look at how to make Canada more competitive, how to make Canada more innovative.
Thank you, Jordan. Next question, please, operator.
Thank you. Merci. The next question is from, la prochaine question est de Bill Curry de Globe and Mail. Please go ahead, à vous la parole.
Thanks, Minister, for your time. Off the top, you'd mentioned a bunch of employment statistics that have improved since the recession. The Parliamentary Budget Officer had a report out this week that said some of those employment markers that you'd listed in the past as fiscal guardrails as an indicator for when stimulus spending would be wound down, that those have been met now. So he argues that the argument is no longer there for the continued stimulus that you've outlined in your past budget. What's your response to that?
Thank you very much for the question, Bill. Look, my first response is the strong jobs numbers that we saw in December are a cause for rejoicing and celebration. From my perspective, as a cabinet minister, when COVID first hit, the fact that 3 million people lost their jobs was a tragedy. That's 3 million people whose lives were just turned upside down. And think of all of their families, of all of the people around them who depended on those jobs. You know, for the economic well-being of most Canadians, nothing matters more than having a good job, and nothing hurts you more than losing your job. And so we really have focused, when we've looked at how to get Canada through this, our target has been first and foremost jobs, jobs, jobs. And when I see those strong jobs numbers, I am very, very happy, because I know that that is real people's lives and tragedies that are being averted. Having said that, I do think that I cited December statistics, as you know well. We do need to be mindful of the fact that Omicron came after those numbers came in, and we don't yet know fully what the impact of Omicron and the related lockdowns and restrictions will be. I was certainly happy when Omicron hit. Well, I was very unhappy when Omicron hit, but I took comfort from and solace in the fact that at the end of October, when we put forward our new targeted business and income support measures, back then, when no one had heard about Omicron, we thought ahead. And we thought, you know what? COVID has turned out to be really, really unpredictable. Let's make sure that Canada has an insurance policy. And so back then, we laid the plans for our lockdown support for businesses and for people. And I was very happy, Bill. In fact, I was completely relieved at the end of December when we used those lockdown support provisions, when we had them in place, when the law had passed in the House of Commons, had passed in the Senate, and we had the ability to provide that support immediately. So on the jobs front, watching very carefully what the impact of Omicron will be. And I think everyone needs to be careful and cautious about that. And I'll just go back finally to my comments a moment ago. I think we all really, really need to be focused on measures to increase Canada's economic potential. I am looking, when I look at what I want to have in the budget, I want to have measures that increase the ability of Canada to grow really, really strongly post-COVID. An economy which grows, an economy which is expanding, is an economy which can really create prosperity for all of its people, and also an economy which will help us as a country have that steadily declining debt to GDP ratio. If we increase the GDP, that curve is going to come down, and fighting COVID was expensive. So my focus, really growing Canada's economic capacity and potential.
Bill, I'm not sure if you're still there. I would love
Yeah,
us to
great.
get in questions as fast as the Canadian soccer team scored goals yesterday in our remaining 5 minutes. If we could get 2 more
just
sets
to
in, that would be
follow
great.
up on
Oh, Greg, we're not that good. But thank you for saying that. That cheers everybody up, I think.
To follow up on your point you were just making there about long-term growth, if you go through the pre-budget submissions of various think tanks and business groups like Anne McClellan and Lisa Rate's Coalition, that's a common recommendation of theirs. And there's a bit of concern on some of these reports that they're not convinced this government is really going to do what it takes to tackle long-term growth in areas like productivity, encouraging private sector innovation, investment, all that kind of stuff. So sort of the skeptics who are making recommendations for what they'd like to see in the pre-budget reports and are concerned about long-term growth, what's your response?
Oh, my response is give me some great recommendations that we can put in place. Yeah, that's my answer. I'll emphasize, I will also say, I think we do need to be looking at ways to make sure that Canada succeeds in the green transition. You read all the reports, Bill, so I know you will have seen the Bank of Canada and OSFI report that talked about how steep the mountain is that Canada has to climb and the Canadian economy has to climb when it comes to the green transition. I am very aware of that. I think that that is a job for government and business, and we have to really, really work together. I think a lot of our conversation about the green transition hitherto has been really focused on the targets of emission reduction, and that is absolutely important. I think now we really need to also be turning our focus to how do we ensure that Canada, in a world which is transitioning to a green economy, continues to have engines and drivers of economic growth. I know that we can do it, but I do not underestimate the challenge there and how hard we have to work together to accomplish that. And then finally, when it comes to expanding the economy's productive capacity, I absolutely think we need to look at innovation. I absolutely think we need to look at productivity. I absolutely think we need to look at business investment and increasing business investment in Canada. I will also say, you know, as I said in my reference to Janet Yellen's term, modern supply side economics, that's something we've been doing in Canada, and that is a really important element too. Measures that can expand our labor force, like early learning and childcare, like the Canada Workers Benefit, investment in human infrastructure, like ensuring that all Canadians can afford a place to live, investments in immigration and ensuring that Canada can continue to have the fastest growing population in the G7. These are also investments in economic growth, and we need to continue to make them as well.
Thank you.
I think we can. Let's see if we can squeeze in one more question. Hopefully, j'espère en français if we have one. Let's see if there's one more out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Merci. The next question is from, la prochaine question est de Juliane Lapointe, Radio-Canada. Please go ahead, à vous la parole.
Oui, bonjour. J'aimerais peut-être vous entendre sur le projet de loi C10 pour débloquer les fonds pour acheter plus rapidement les tests rapides. Est-ce que vous pouvez nous expliquer pourquoi c'était important d'en faire un projet de loi séparé, puis pourquoi ce n'est pas une démarche qui avait été faite plus tôt, étant donné que déjà en décembre, on voyait que la demande en tests rapides dépassait l'offre?
Merci beaucoup pour la question. Et comme vous savez très bien, dans la mise à jour économique, on a annoncé une dépense de 1,7 milliard de dollars additionnels pour les tests rapides parce que on comprend l'importance d'accès aux tests rapides pour permettre la réouverture d'économie canadienne. Alors, le fédéral, même en décembre, on était convaincu que les tests rapides sont nécessaires et que les tests rapides sont vraiment inutiles pour la santé publique, bien sûr, mais aussi pour l'économie, pour la réouverture économique. On pense maintenant qu'on peut pousser même un peu plus l'économie canadienne on peut permettre encore plus la réouverture avec plus de tests rapides. Et c'est pourquoi j'appuie fortement mon collègue Jean-Yves Duclos avec ce projet de loi. Je pense que tous les Canadiens sont d'accord que, comme l'année passée, on a compris qu'avec les vaccins, que l'approvisionnement des vaccins était inutile et essentiel pour la lutte contre la COVID. On a maintenant assez de vaccins et maintenant on doit se focuser sur les tests rapides et aussi sur les médecins qu'on a annoncé l'approvisionnement des médecins thérapeutiques et ils ont commencé d'arriver au Canada.
D'accord, peut-être en relance concernant les camionneurs. J'aimerais vous entendre là-dessus. Quand vous avez vu avec les images qu'on a vues en fin de semaine, qu'on a vues encore aujourd'hui, comment vous voyez ça pour la suite de la semaine, par exemple, pour les élus comme vous qui allez aller au Parlement? Est-ce que c'est inquiétant pour la sécurité des élus, le fait qu'il y a encore des manifestants qui sont sur place et tout ça? Est-ce que vous allez y penser, vous, cette semaine?
La chose importante, ce n'est pas ce que je pense concernant moi personnellement. Je suis très contente. C'était important pour moi d'être ici à Ottawa aujourd'hui. C'était important pour moi d'être à la Chambre des communes pour démontrer aux Canadiens que le travail du Parlement continue, que le travail du gouvernement continue. Et je me sens très bien à Ottawa, dans la Chambre des communes, aujourd'hui. Mais, comme j'ai dit au début, c'est vraiment étonnant, c'est vraiment choquant de voir les images que j'ai vues à ma maison à Toronto cette fin de semaine. Et la chose que j'ai remarquée, c'était le choc de mes enfants. Parce que comme les écoliers canadiens autour de notre pays, ils connaissent qui est Terry Fox. Terry Fox est vraiment un héros pour tous les enfants canadiens. Et quand ils ont vu le statut, avec les affiches et tout ça qui était attaché à la statue, c'était un choc terrible pour mes enfants et je pense que c'était un choc dans plusieurs des maisons du Canada. Je pense qu'aujourd'hui, c'est important pour les politiciens, les leaders des communautés, les gens autour de notre communauté, de dire à nos enfants, de dire une à les autres que ce n'est pas comment on fait des choses au Canada. Et en plus, le fait que le swastika était présent, c'est complètement inacceptable et on doit dire ça.
Merci pour toutes les questions. I think that's all the time we have for questions today. Minister, if you'd like to have a final word, that would be great. Otherwise, merci. Thank you, Miigwech.
Yeah, I just want to say merci. Thank you, Miigwech. Thank you very much for the questions. And to all the journalists who are working in Ottawa, I know that also some of you, from the accounts that I have read, some of you have found some real challenges in doing your jobs this weekend. And please know that I am really grateful to you for doing your job. I know that Canadians are really grateful to you as well. What you're doing is really important. And it is also really unacceptable for journalists to face any kind of harassment when they're doing their work. So, merci à vous aussi.